He was just a truck driver, trying to find out what was hidden inside a sealed trailer. But the moment he broke that door open, he realized he had made a terrible mistake. Two armed killers suddenly appeared, pointing their guns at him and threatening him.
You should have taken the cash and kept your eyes on the road, Ray.
But the driver didn't panic. He knew something they didn't. And just when the killers thought they had him trapped, police sirens suddenly cut through the night. Within moments, the men who came to silence him were the ones being taken away in handcuffs.
Drop your weapons!
But why was this truck carrying something worth killing for? And how did an ordinary truck driver become the one man standing between them and the truth? To understand why an exhausted long-haul driver fighting to save his daughter ended up bringing a logistics empire to its knees, we have to turn back the clock 72 hours. Back to a freezing autumn night at a desolate freight yard in Akron, Ohio, where this story truly began. In the late autumn of 2016, the industrial heartlands of the American Midwest were blanketed in cold rain and economic decay. Winter in Ohio was never easy for independent long-haul truck drivers. Ray Miller, 48 years old, had spent over 2 decades living out of the sleeper cab of his dark red 2008 Peterbilt 579 semi-truck. To Ray, the rig was far more than a tool for making a living. It was his second home, a sanctuary of diesel smoke and faded vinyl that held the calluses of a lifetime spent hauling freight across thousands of miles of interstate asphalt. Ray was a quiet, self-reliant, working-class man. He didn't drink, he didn't gamble, and he took immense pride in keeping his rig immaculate, servicing his own engine oil, and making every delivery on schedule. But over the past year, his quiet, orderly life had been shattered. His 11-year-old daughter, Hannah, suffered from a rare and aggressive autoimmune disease that required specialized treatment at a private children's hospital in Chicago. The medical bills arrived each week like clockwork, each one higher than the last, far outpacing what he earned hauling agricultural grain or factory auto parts. Every evening before hitting the road, Ray would call Hannah from his cab. He would sit on the edge of his narrow bunk mattress, holding his phone tightly as her small, tired voice came through the speaker. "Daddy, are you coming home this weekend?" she would ask, trying to sound brave over the background hum of hospital monitors. "I'm working on it, sweet pea," Ray would reply, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I just have a few more runs to finish, and then I'll be right there to read you another chapter of your book. You just focus on resting, okay?" "I promise, Daddy. Drive safe. I love you." "I love you too, Hannah. Always." When he hung up, the silence inside the steel cabin was deafening. Ray would open his ledger book, staring at the red numbers printed on the collection notices. He was 3 months behind on his truck loan. The bank had issued a final repossession warning. If he failed to make a payment of $4,000 by the end of the week, they would impound his Peterbilt. Losing his truck meant losing his livelihood, his home, and any hope of paying for Hannah's next life-saving treatment cycle. On a freezing Tuesday night at 11 p.m., Ray sat alone in his idling cab at an abandoned, mud-slicked freight yard outside Akron. Rain pelted the fiberglass hood in steady, hypnotic sheets. He sipped lukewarm, bitter coffee from a dented thermos, staring blankly at the yellow streetlight reflecting in the puddles outside. That was when heavy footsteps echoed up the aluminum steps of his cab. The passenger door opened slightly, letting in a blast of freezing wind, followed by a man wearing an expensive charcoal wool coat and a dark fedora. It was Edward Vance, Senior Vice President of Operations for Vance Logistics, one of the most powerful private shipping and freight conglomerates in the Midwest. Vance was a sharp, calculating man with slicked-back gray hair and cold, transactional eyes that looked through people rather than at them. Without asking permission, Vance stepped onto the floorboard and pulled the door shut behind him. He didn't offer a handshake or ask Ray's name. Instead, he reached inside his coat and pulled out a thick manila envelope, placing it directly onto Ray's lap. Through the unsealed flap, Ray could see stacks of crisp, uncirculated $100 bills. $5,000 waiting for you when the job is completed. Ray looked down at the money, then up at Vance. What's the freight? A 53-foot refrigerated trailer parked in Bay 4, Vance replied, pointing a gloved finger toward the dark edge of the yard. It's an unmanifested load. No shipping papers, no weight logs, no stops at official weigh stations. You haul it from here, across 3 state lines to a private storage compound in the desert hills outside Elko, Nevada. Ray narrowed his eyes. Long-haul drivers knew the unwritten rules of the road. Unmanifested freight meant gray market goods, illegal hazmat, or unregistered corporate property. What's inside the trailer? That doesn't concern you, Vance said, his tone sharpening slightly. The rear doors are secured with heavy-duty steel industrial padlocks and sealed with an official tamper-proof serial band. You have 3 simple conditions. First, you drive straight through without stopping for rest or coffee breaks. Second, you stay on the route I give you. Third, and most importantly, under no circumstances do you break that seal or touch the handles on that trailer door before you reach the compound. If the seal is intact when you arrive, you get the second half of the cash. If it's broken, you get nothing. And my legal team will ensure your commercial driver's license is permanently revoked. Ray sat in silence. Every instinct honed over 25 years on the highway told him to hand the envelope back and drive away. But as he looked at the money, he saw his daughter's face in the hospital bed. He saw the bank's repossession notice. $5,000 tonight meant keeping his truck. $10,000 meant Hannah got her surgery. When do I pull out? Ray asked, his voice low. Now, Vance said, stepping down from the cab. Don't disappoint me, Ray. On the road, some secrets are worth more than your life. Ray hitched his Peterbilt to the heavy, dark gray refrigerated trailer in Bay 4. He connected the air brake lines, checked the kingpin lock, and listened to the loud mechanical roar of the trailer's diesel cooling unit kicking on. At 11:45 p.m., he pulled his rig out of the muddy lot, steering his 18-wheeler onto Interstate 80 West under a thick blanket of freezing midnight rain. He had no way of knowing that the moment his red taillights vanished into the dark, a blacked-out SUV sitting in the shadow of an overpass switched on its engine and silently pulled onto the highway behind him. As the miles bled into hours, Interstate 80 stretched out into a desolate, endless ribbon of wet black asphalt. Dense valley fog rolled across the highway, clinging to the windshield like grease. The Peterbilt's heavy wiper blades worked rhythmically, scraping back and forth with a steady, hypnotic beat that matched the thrum of the 500-horsepower diesel engine beneath the hood. Ray kept his hands locked at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. He was a veteran of the winter roads, accustomed to long, lonely stretches through Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. But tonight, the atmosphere inside the cab felt heavy, suffocating, and wrong. Around 2:30 a.m., after crossing the Indiana state line, Ray glanced into his large side mirrors. Through the swirling mist behind his trailer, he noticed a set of dim halogen headlights sitting exactly 3 truck lengths behind his rear bumper. At first, he thought it was just another long-haul trucker or an overnight commuter making time. But as 30 minutes turned into an hour, Ray began to test the vehicle behind him. He eased his foot off the accelerator, dropping his speed from 65 miles per hour down to 55. The headlights behind him instantly slowed, matching his exact speed without attempting to pass on the open left lane. Ray pressed down on the pedal, bringing the heavy rig up to 75 miles per hour. The headlights accelerated in perfect unison, maintaining the exact same 3 truck-length distance. Ray reached for his CB radio microphone hanging from the headliner, switching the channel to the standard trucker frequency, 19. "Breaker 19, this is the red Peterbilt westbound out of Indiana," Ray spoke into the mic, his voice raspy. "To the four-wheeler riding my tail. You've got 3 open lanes to pass. Clear off my bumper, driver." Static crackled over the speaker. No answer. Ray repeated the call twice more, but the radio remained dead silent. He adjusted his convex mirror to get a clearer angle. As the rig passed under an overhead highway luminaire, the light briefly illuminated the vehicle behind him. It was a full-sized, heavy-duty SUV, painted matte black. Its windows were heavily tinted, its front bumper was reinforced with a steel brush guard, and it carried no front license plate. Ray's pulse quickened. In his line of work, you learn to read the road. That SUV wasn't driven by a lost tourist or a tired commuter. It was a tailing vehicle, maintaining a precise, tactical escort position behind his load. For 8 grueling hours, Ray drove through blinding rain and freezing fog. The mental fatigue began to take a heavy toll. His neck muscles throbbed from the constant vibration of the road, and his eyes burned from staring into the dark glare of headlights reflecting off wet pavement. Every time he pulled into an interstate travel plaza to splash cold water on his face and grab a coffee, the black SUV would pull onto the outer access road, parking in the shadows near the edge of the lot, its engine idling, its occupants hidden behind blacked-out glass. They weren't trying to hide their presence. They were letting him know he was being watched. By the afternoon of the second day, Ray was pushing deep into the barren, windswept plains of Iowa and Nebraska. The rain had turned into a brutal late autumn blizzard. Snowflakes as large as quarters slammed against the glass, turning the highway into a treacherous sheet of black ice. At a fuel bay outside North Platte, Ray climbed down from his cab to check his tire pressure and inspect his hitch connection. The freezing wind bit through his canvas jacket, but as he walked along the side of the 53-foot trailer, something else caught his attention. Despite the outdoor temperature hovering near 20 degrees Fahrenheit, the heavy Thermo King refrigeration unit mounted on the front of the trailer was running at maximum cooling capacity. The diesel auxiliary motor was screaming, venting a strange, unnatural exhaust odor that smelled like cold copper and industrial bleach. Ray walked to the back of the trailer. Condensation was dripping rapidly from the rubber door seals, freezing into icicles as it hit the steel bumper. He reached out and touched the locking mechanism. The steel handle was ice cold, vibrating with the force of whatever was operating inside. He remembered Vance's strict instructions. Under no circumstances do you break that seal or touch the handles. Ray looked toward the highway exit ramp. The black SUV was parked on the gravel shoulder 300 yards away, its headlights cutting through the swirling snow, watching his every move. Ray leaned against the cold aluminum wall of his trailer, his mind racing. He realized the trap he was in. If that trailer contained illegal hazardous waste, stolen property, or something worse, and he got pulled over by the Nebraska State Patrol, Edward Vance wouldn't step up to defend him.
Vance would claim Ray stole the trailer or acted as an rogue operator. Ray would be arrested, sent to a federal penitentiary for decades, and his daughter would be left alone in a hospital bed with no one to pay her bills. He was being used as a disposable mule, a blind pawn carrying a bomb he wasn't allowed to see. At 2:30 a.m. on the third night, as his rig began to climb the steep, winding mountain passes leading toward the desolate Nevada border, the blizzard turned catastrophic. The state police issued emergency radio broadcasts ordering all commercial truck traffic to clear the highways and park at the nearest staging areas. Ray knew that if he pulled into a crowded official truck stop, state troopers would inspect his rig, demand his non-existent freight manifest, and cut the steel seal on the trailer themselves. His life would be over in a matter of minutes. Steering his 18-wheeler through the blinding whiteout, Ray made a high-stakes decision. He saw a rusted, overgrown exit sign for an abandoned highway rest stop, a rest area that had been closed by the State Department of Transportation back in the late 1990s. Turning hard on the wheel, Ray guided his heavy rig off the interstate, bouncing down a snow-covered gravel road into a dark, pine-bordered hollow hidden entirely from the main highway. The abandoned rest stop was a graveyard of decayed concrete and rusted metal. Deep snow drifted against the crumbling walls of a boarded-up brick visitor center. Tall pine trees surrounded the lot, blocking out the wind and casting long, jagged shadows under the pale moonlight. Ray brought his Peterbilt to a stop in the center of the lot. He engaged the air brakes with a loud psht, turned off his main headlights, but left the diesel engine idling to keep his air tanks pressurized. Within seconds, two bright beams of white light cut through the falling snow behind him. The black SUV pulled into the lot, stopping 20 feet behind his rear bumper, blocking any chance of Ray backing up. The SUV's high beams illuminated the back of the trailer in a stark, blinding glare. Ray sat in his cab for a long moment, taking a deep, steadying breath. He reached under his driver's seat, pulling out a heavy, 5-pound steel bolt cutter and a 36-inch iron crowbar. His hands were calloused, his body was exhausted, but his mind had become crystal clear. He was done being hunted. He opened the cab door and stepped down into the knee-deep snow. The freezing air slammed into his lungs like a physical blow. From the black SUV, the driver and passenger doors opened simultaneously. Two tall men in dark, waterproof tactical coats stepped out into the snow. They wore thick gloves and heavy boots, their faces partially obscured by thermal face masks. As they walked slowly toward Ray over the crunching gravel, both men kept their right hands tucked deep inside their coat pockets. "You're off the designated route, driver," the man on the left called out, his voice harsh and metallic over the howling wind. Get back in your cab, turn this rig around, and get back on Interstate 80. You don't have permission to stop here." Ray didn't move. He stood his ground by the rear doors of his trailer, holding the bolt cutter loosely at his side. "This is my truck," Ray said, his voice raspy but carrying an unshakable weight. "My name is on the title. My blood and sweat paid for every mile this engine has run. If I cross the Nevada line with an illegal load, I go to prison, not your boss. I'm checking my freight." "You were paid $5,000 to haul, not to ask questions," the second man warned, taking a step closer, his hand shifting inside his coat. "You break that seal, and you don't walk out of this lot alive." Ray stared directly into the man's eyes. "I've spent 25 years on these roads, son. I've survived ice storms, brake failures, and mountain rollovers. You think a pair of suits in an SUV scares me?" Without another word, Ray turned to the trailer doors. He jammed the hardened steel jaws of the heavy bolt cutter around the thick industrial locking band. He planted his boots in the snow, leaned his full body weight into the handles, and squeezed. A sharp, metallic crack echoed through the snow-covered canyon like a rifle shot. The severed steel seal snapped apart, falling into the white snow below. Ray grabbed the heavy iron door latches, yanked them upward, and pulled the double doors of the refrigerated trailer wide open. A massive, billowing cloud of freezing white mist poured out of the dark interior, smelling intensely of industrial disinfectant, cold metal, and ozone. Ray clicked on his heavy-duty LED flashlight, directing the beam into the cargo bay. The trailer was not carrying auto parts, electronic goods, or commercial merchandise. Strapped down securely along the floorboards with heavy-duty steel chains were 12 large, specialized shipping containers made of brushed aluminum and high-density polymer. Each container was roughly 6 feet long and 4 feet wide, fitted with digital temperature gauges and industrial air scrubbers. Stenciled in bright yellow warning paint across the side of every container was the official seal of the Federal Environmental Protection Agency and a red warning label. Hazardous Evidence Containment Unit, Vance Industrial Processing Plant, case number 2023-ENV-8890. Ray stepped up onto the rear bumper and climbed inside the freezing trailer. Breath pluming in the air, he used his iron crowbar to pop the locking latches on the nearest aluminum crate. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside sat rows of sealed, color-coded glass bio-vials containing dark, sludge-like water samples, alongside thick, leather-bound internal audit ledgers, hard drives, and original handwritten safety logs from Vance Logistics' primary chemical refining facility. Ray pulled out a thick ledger, flipping through the pages under his flashlight beam. The documents detailed a massive, systematic corporate cover-up. 3 years earlier, an industrial failure at Vance's main processing plant had leaked thousands of gallons of toxic carcinogenic chemicals into the local municipal groundwater supply of a rural Ohio town. To prevent a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit and criminal prosecution, Edward Vance had ordered his managers to bury the test results, falsify EPA reports, and quietly pay off local inspectors. Worse still, tucked into the back of the ledger was a confidential legal memo listing the names of 3 former plant maintenance workers who had threatened to go to the press. Workers who had mysteriously disappeared from their homes within weeks of the spill. Vance hadn't just hired Ray to haul freight. With a federal grand jury reopening the toxic spill investigation that very week, Vance was using an unsuspecting, desperate driver to transport the last remaining physical evidence across state lines to be permanently incinerated in an unmonitored industrial furnace in the Nevada desert. Ray closed the ledger, holding it tightly against his chest. He turned around to face the open trailer doors. The two men from the SUV were standing at the edge of the trailer bumper. Their coats were unbuttoned, and their right hands were now holding compact, dark 9mm handguns equipped with heavy aluminum suppressors pointed directly at Ray's chest. The silence inside the hollow was absolute, broken only by the low, rhythmic idle of the Peterbilt's diesel engine and the howling mountain wind dragging snow across the metal roof of the trailer. The high-beam headlights from the black SUV cast long, distorted shadows of the two gunmen against the aluminum interior walls. The two barrels remained rock-steady, leveled at Ray's heart. "You should have taken the cash and kept your eyes on the road, Ray," the lead gunman said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Mr. Vance offered you a way out of your debts. Now you're just another tragic accident on a snowy mountain road." Ray stood in the center of the freezer trailer, holding the heavy, leather-bound ledger in his left hand. His face was weathered. His canvas coat was dusted with white snow, but his eyes showed no trace of panic. He didn't drop the book, and he didn't raise his hands in surrender. "You think Edward Vance gives a damn about either of you?" Ray asked, his voice calm, ringing with quiet authority. "Look at what's in these crates. This isn't just illegal dumping. This is murder, corporate fraud, and federal conspiracy. You think once you shoot me and burn this truck, Vance is going to leave two loose ends walking around with guns?" The second gunman's eyes flickered slightly, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Shut your mouth, driver. Step down to your knees." "I'm not getting on my knees for a pair of hired cowards," Ray said coldly. He slowly reached his right hand into his inner coat pocket. "Hands where we can see them!" the lead gunman shouted, taking a step forward, his finger pressing against the trigger. Ray pulled out his heavy-duty, ruggedized smartphone. The screen was illuminated, displaying a live green satellite data stream with a running timer counting down seconds. "Before I stepped out of my cab," Ray spoke clearly, holding the phone so they could see the display, "I tapped into my rig's satellite telematics system. Long-haul drivers use it for emergency breakdown tracking. I locked the GPS coordinates of this rest stop into an automated, encrypted cloud transmission." The lead gunman frowned. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Ray replied, pointing his flashlight at a small black antenna box mounted above his cab. "Every 30 seconds, my system pings the regional dispatch office of the Nebraska State Patrol. I set a dead man switch on my driver portal. If I don't enter my security PIN every 15 minutes, the system automatically uploads a high-resolution digital scan of these EPA ledgers and my exact live coordinates straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Criminal Dispatch Unit." Ray checked the timer on his screen. "You've got about 2 minutes before the timer expires and the file transmits. Shoot me now, and you guarantee a federal murder charge on top of an active FBI raid." The two gunmen looked at each other, their tactical composure cracking under the weight of Ray's calculated move. Suddenly, from the main highway half a mile away,
A low, rising wail of multiple sirens tore through the night air. Red and blue flashing lights reflected off the snow-covered pine tree tops, moving fast down the abandoned access road. "He wasn't bluffing!" the second gunman yelled, panicking as he lowered his weapon and turned toward the SUV. "Let's go! Move!" "Stand where you are!" A voice boomed over a bullhorn from the entrance of the lot. 4 Nebraska State Patrol cruisers roared into the rest stop, their high beams blinding the area, surrounding the black SUV in a tight, tactical V formation. State troopers poured out from behind their armored car doors with rifles drawn, their commands echoing over the roaring wind. "State Police, drop your weapons! Hands on your heads! Do it now!" The 2 hired gunmen dropped their suppressed pistols into the deep snow, raising their hands slowly as troopers moved in, forcing them to the ground and slapping heavy steel handcuffs onto their wrists. Ray stood calmly at the back of his trailer. He stepped down onto the snow, holding the original EPA ledgers securely in his arm. An elder state trooper captain approached him, his weapon lowered, looking at the massive refrigerated rig and the open trailer doors. "You Ray Miller?" the captain asked, inspecting Ray's driver's license. "I am, Captain," Ray said, handing over the leather-bound ledger along with the original $5,000 cash envelope Edward Vance had given him. "I believe you'll find everything you need to arrest Edward Vance right here in these pages." The captain flipped through the document, his expression turning grave as he read the EPA case numbers and Vance's personal signature. He looked up at Ray, seeing the exhaustion etched into the driver's face, but also the unshakable integrity in his eyes. "You took a hell of a risk, son," the captain said softly. "Most men would have taken the money and looked the other way." "Some things aren't for sale, Captain," Ray replied, looking out at the flashing blue lights reflecting off the snow. "My daughter needs a father she can be proud of." The federal raid on Vance Logistics unfolded with devastating speed. Using the physical evidence recovered from Ray's trailer, a task force of FBI agents, EPA investigators, and federal marshals executed simultaneous search warrants at Vance's corporate headquarters in Akron and his private estate in Cleveland. Edward Vance was arrested in his study at 5 a.m., just as his legal team was attempting to wire funds to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Facing overwhelming physical evidence, unedited water test records, and the testimony of the 2 arrested gunmen, Vance's high-priced defense attorneys were helpless. 6 months later, following a high-profile federal trial, Edward Vance was convicted on multiple felony counts, including federal hazardous waste conspiracy, evidence tampering, corporate fraud, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. His multi-million-dollar logistics firm was dissolved, its assets seized by the court, and placed into a multi-million-dollar environmental trust fund to clean up the poisoned groundwater and compensate the affected families in Ohio. Under the Federal Whistleblower Protection Act, Ray Miller was officially cleared of all wrongdoing. Because he had taken proactive steps to secure the evidence, report the crime, and cooperate fully with federal law enforcement before entering federal jurisdiction, he was awarded a substantial statutory whistleblower reward from the Department of Justice. The reward money changed everything. It completely paid off the remaining loan on his Peterbilt truck, cleared every penny of his accumulated debts, and established a permanent medical trust for his daughter. On a warm, sunny morning in late May 2026, the sky over Chicago was a brilliant, cloudless blue.
Ray's red Peterbilt sat parked in a tree-lined bay outside the main entrance of the Chicago Children's Hospital. The rig was spotlessly clean, its chrome stacks reflecting the bright morning sunlight like mirrors. The heavy glass doors of the hospital lobby opened. Stepping out into the warm air was 11-year-old Hannah. Her face was full of color, her eyes bright and laughing. She was no longer wearing the heavy leg braces or sitting in a wheelchair. She walked under her own strength, holding a small overnight bag in one hand and a brand new leather book in the other. Ray climbed down from his cab, stepping out onto the pavement. He wore a clean flannel shirt and jeans, a warm, genuine smile breaking across his weathered face. "Daddy!" Hannah cried out, dropping her bag and running across the pavement. Ray knelt down, catching her in a tight, protective embrace, lifting her up into the air as she laughed. He held her close, feeling her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck, smelling the clean scent of sunshine in her hair. "Look at you, sweet pea," Ray whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he set her down. "You look like you're ready to take on the world." "The doctor said I'm completely cleared, Daddy," she declared, pointing toward the Peterbilt. "Can we go home now? Can I ride in the high seat?" "You bet you can, kiddo," Ray smiled, swinging her up into the passenger seat and buckling her safety belt. Ray walked around to the driver's side, climbed into his seat, and turned the ignition key. The powerful diesel engine roared to life with a deep, reassuring rumble. He engaged the transmission, pulled out onto the open boulevard, and pointed his truck toward the highway heading home. For over 20 years, Ray had believed that his life was defined by the endless yellow lines on the asphalt, the heavy loads he carried, and the constant struggle to survive another day. But as he looked across at his healthy, laughing daughter sitting beside him, he knew that the true measure of a man wasn't found in the money he made or the powerful people he obeyed. It was found in the courage to stand up when it mattered most, to protect the innocent, and to keep driving toward the light, no matter how dark the road became. If this story reminded you that honesty, courage, and love for family are worth fighting for, please take a moment to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue to craft these deep, meaningful stories about regular people who refuse to break under pressure. Don't forget to subscribe to Karma Storytime and click the notification bell so you never miss our weekly long-form audio journeys. Thank you for spending your time with us tonight. Drive safe, look out for one another, and until next time, take care.